I'm Raymond. I'm from Tecmo Koei. Actually, by July, we will be known as Koei Tecmo. So, worldwide, we'll be doing a rebranding and then to synchronize with the brands. So Koei Tecmo. So, for those of you who have my name cards, that's going to become a collector's item pretty soon. Right. Koei Tecmo, we do, as I think most of you who are familiar with console games and handheld games, titles like Ninja Gaiden, Dead or Alive, Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors. But I think outside of Japan, not many people are aware that actually we have been doing social games for a while. As far back as I think 10 years back, we went to the MMORPG space as well. So we do have quite a fair bit of experience in terms of online and social community type of services. Especially in the last 2 to 3 years or so, we have branched out quite a fair bit into the mobile space, into the so-called casual space, casual, quote unquote, and especially in Japan in the last couple of years, right, that's seen tremendous growth as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is really trying to share some of those experiences, trying to share some of those lessons learned, and I think some parts of that too, it's from our experience and our know-how in running some of the, MMORPGs and stuff that have been we found to be relevant when it comes to running games as a service. The title of my talk here is Painful but Necessary, Key Disciplines to Manage Your Social Game Well, right? I was kind of hesitant to use the word discipline because I think, especially since you're coming to Singapore, right? Just the other day I was just talking to someone, one of the audience who came from overseas, and it's like, oh, don't jaywalk, right? Don't litter, you can be fined, you can be caned, right? It's amazing what they put in guidebooks, so you probably know more about the rules of Singapore than myself. But really here today, what I really want to bring across is, we are involved in putting out games, right? When we put out games, we get very excited, we see the user response. There are tons of things to do, right? Tons of ideas and features when you push out the games, but at the same time too, you have to listen to your users, you have to listen to the response, and to react accordingly. And there are tons of things to do, right? So, there are a lot of times when you get so immersed into that operational level that you really need to take a step back. You need to take a step back and look at what you're doing. So what I'm going to talk about today is really, hopefully after this, you can take a look back, take a step back, look at your business, and really get to see what you've been doing and how well that's been performing. So let me try to share with you some of those things then. So in essence, I will talk about these 4 things here, right? Content discipline, operational discipline, data discipline, and physical discipline. Right? I don't have much time, so I will just, on each of these, maybe spend about 3 to 5 minutes or so. Okay, first thing, content discipline. Right, when I look at games, I find that you can probably group them into a few particular kinds, right? There are those whereby when I've talked to developers and say, we are throwing out a game soon. Oh, great. And then we are throwing out another game in like 2 to 3 weeks' time, and another one in another 2 to 3 weeks' time. And I say, oh, so what's your strategy, right? So our strategy is to push out as many as possible, gather and roll as many customers as possible, and then eventually this will form part of the pool for some game they'll be making along the way. I say, sounds like a pretty decent strategy. So it's a quick throw out, learn about the market, get the information back, build the next game, and throw it out again. That's one operating model. The second operating model is some companies, they take some time to build a very good game, and when it's released, it's really a very good game. Right? So good that there's not much need to really tweak anything, right? And it's a great game, everybody loves it, they play it. You don't really have a great need to do modifications to the game, i.e. you have gotten everything sweet and right? But how often does that happen? And of course, for these games, the users will be thinking, so when are you going to do the next release, major release? And that's probably like a couple of months down the road, 1 year down the road, right? But none of us have that luxury of knowing that your game works and of knowing that when the game you push out reaches that kind of status. So we are somewhere in between, right? And for our company too, we have been learning along the way, right? Some of the games, we have relied on existing franchises. There have been, successes, there have been not so successful ones. And one thing we find really consistent across is that when you push out something, you definitely have to change things, right? And this is really what users are looking out for, right? When you go out with someone, right, and the person comes and dresses in the same clothes all the time, right? Unless it's your particular kind of flavor, right? You're really expecting change. So users, customers expect change. And a little bit at a time, right? So that they know that there are things moving. They know that the community is moving. They know that the game is moving along, right, with you as well. And that's very important, right? Because what you're doing is you're sending a signal that you're constantly active in the game, that you are monitoring what the users are doing, and you're listening to the feedback as well, right? Never mind if you can't meet all the requirements as well. You list them up, you prioritize them, and then at different stages, you think and label over when you think these things should come up. Right? But change is important, right? So, and change in the sense of not just in terms of feature set changes, but I think change from the point of view of even in the same content itself, right? When you're pushing out things, it's important to surprise your customers, right? This is very important, right? A lot of customers, when they play our games, the reason why a lot of games have good DAU sustenance over time, some of our online social games have been running for about 2 to 3 years or so, it's because we have always relied on this element of surprise, right? We make sure that in the game system, right, that people are really used to, we constantly make changes. We play a game of scissors, paper, stone, right? The rock beats the scissors. Tomorrow we flip it around. The scissors beats the rock, right? So that at any time, the customers always have to figure out what these new rules mean, what do the gameplay mean, how does this affect? They can't tweak, right? You will know that after each event or activity that you run the game in, users will be talking about it a lot. They'll be analyzing it to death. They will come out with strategies to try to beat your game. Right? So the trick here is to try to outwit and outsmart them. Right? And the thing to do this is to try to tweak some of the rules, rebalance some of the things, so that they are always wondering, right, what's going to come out next? What do they do? And this is very good, because from a monetization point of view, it allows you to, push out, get rid of old stock of items and stuff. At the same time, also look towards new items to try to push towards the new activities they're intending for customers. What we have very often, let me just move here too, is that sometimes we announce before the event starts, right, before the content changes, we're going to change this thing, but we don't tell you everything, right? We tell you these things, and then users start to think, this is what we do, especially if it's PvP, group PvP, etc. They imagine. And then sometimes even before the event, we have one rest day. What does the rest day do, right? The rest day is the shopping day, right? The shopping day basically, in essence, to allow the customers, because they don't have time when they're running in the events themselves, to be purchasing things. Shopping day is to allow them to come in, make the purchases, prepare for the events, okay? And then when the events start, right, there's some certainty, but at the same time too, we'll introduce elements of change. Even within the same event itself, let's say spanning across a week, at different points, the second day, the fourth day, the sixth day, we'll do a little bit of balancing changes as well, so that we try to make the game balance out. As a user, right, the worst thing you hit is that you look at the rankings, wow, number 1 to number 10, your score, far beyond what I can reach. Forget it, stop playing, right? What we want to give the users is a chance, right? So these are things your developers have to constantly do. Now, from a developer's viewpoint, this is very exciting, because what this means is that although it's the same game, right, you're thinking about ways to make the game exciting. So from a motivation point of view too, your team of developers will be constantly trying to think of ways to try to make the users play and play smarter, right? So that's very important. I've listed down here, some things that are, pretty much, I think, practice out there. But for ourselves, whenever we push out something, we make sure we have a stock of changes, right? This is important, right? Because when you have, stock of things you can keep, if problems happen, right, you have backups, right? You have things that you can roll out in the meantime. I think DAU features above monetization features, especially at start, I think you know this. Different classes, right? I think it's very important. Every game has different types of users, right? You have to make a very conscientious decision what kind of users you are going to target. There's no way you're going to please everyone, right? A new user who joins, you offer a promotion. The old users complain. Why don't we have that, right? The new users who join, they say, wow, everyone is so far ahead in the pack. How do I catch up? Right? These are things you have to think about. Whether you segment the market further, whether you have tiers within your game, or whether you have some ways whereby through paying, you can actually allow some of these balances to be redressed. So again, those are monetization opportunities. Okay, so that's for content discipline. Just to give you an example, I know it's too small here, but in-house, this is something we do and we try to stick to. And I think this is especially important, right? For those of you who are running startup companies, for those of you who have small teams, where the developer is the owner, right? And really the time's at your own disposal. But really you have to set for yourself a mandate, right? At which time, at which place, I should be launching certain things. So what we have broken down here is when do we do certain monetization? When do we run certain events? When do this overlap? When do the feature updates come about? Campaigns, publicity, all these are interlinked, right? So prior to even doing these things and execution, we have a very clear idea of what we are going to achieve. Okay, next, I want to move towards operational discipline. I think a lot of this is pretty obvious, but I think the key point here I want to point out is that, it's really what I've been saying just now, right? You really need to say, okay, we are going to launch event on Wednesday, 10 p.m., and we're going to do that, right? That's important, right? If you allow some of these things to slip, then potentially you'll be losing monetization opportunities. When you launch events, right? Let's say, just at 8 p.m. when it's peak hour, all the users come in and suddenly your server crashes. Too bad. By the time you fix it at 11, right, it's over, right? So what we try to do, at least in-house, is to try to start these things a little bit earlier, iron out some of the problems. You see the load getting up, you can monitor it. By the time it gets to peak hour, you're ready. Same thing for before weekends and public holidays. And then for support, right, you need this, right? Your team of developers, right? They need to have in them the discipline, right? To maintain, they know when are the peak times, when to be around, when to look at the stuff, even from home as well, right? So actually our developers constantly, right, they are on WhatsApp or whatever, chat forums, they are looking at the forums themselves just to see what's happening in the game too. Okay, those things too. Close of event, right? That's also very important, especially if your event towards the end, everybody's rushing in to try to kill the boss or whatever, right? That's when things are going to happen. So you need people to look out for these things and watch out for them as well. Okay, let me move on. Operational discipline. Your developers need to play the game naturally, right? And of course, your partners and whoever it is that's supporting, right? They need to know firsthand. Very importantly, we rely a lot of our, information, right? Bugs report, right? By the time the customer gets to the stage whereby they make an official report, right? A lot of this will already appear on the forums. So look out for the forums, right? The forums are key places. We want to sense where problems have happened. In terms of priority of bug fixing, I've listed down some there. Call a timeout, right? If you really can't handle it, right? A lot of times, you see a problem, right? It's slowing down the server and everything, and it's 1 hour before you fix it, 2 hours, and it just gets worse. And then you are going to be dealing with tons of fallout on the forums, operational issues and everything, and maybe even compensation later, right? So make a decision, right? You may be sacrificing the 1 to 2 hours, but those 1 to 2 hours are very important. And then lastly, compensation, right? At least as far as our company is concerned, we have a philosophy towards compensating to users, especially when it's our problem, it's our system problem, right? Never mind if only a small percentage of the users are affected, right? But the problem could potentially have affected everyone, we compensate, right? I think it creates a lot of goodwill, creates a lot of people say, okay, these guys are responsible, these guys really want to make us happy. And in a way too, right, there's a mutual respect there as well that needs to be built up. Let me move on. Okay, data, right? I want to talk about this. Data discipline. Right, couple of things here. You don't need to collect everything, right? We have had, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? For those of you who have done physics, right? The law behind this is that the more you try to measure something, the more actually you influence what you're measuring, right? And especially I think for inexperienced teams, right? A lot of them don't realize this, right? When they are going to launch the service, hey, we need to know what the users are doing here and doing there, and that event and stuff. So lots of print log statements and stuff, and try to capture, in essence, the data that will be coming, and they'll be really, really useful. But what's being forgotten is that, at the very start too, right? A lot of users are coming in, this is going to jam our server. All these activities are going to be taking up valuable server time, right? I think the last thing you really want to do is, open the floodgates and open up more servers, because that's only a temporary solution. So you need to be very selective. You need to be choosy, right? You need to nail down to what you need. And at certain points of the service, at certain points when your content becomes more mature, right? You would ditch tools, right? You would ditch some of these logs because you don't need them anymore. You already have the information, you know the patterns. You can move on. Right? Second thing is you don't need to analyze everything, right? Really zoom into what you need, right? Start of service, middle of service, end of service. Have goals for what you're looking out for, right? And then you can zoom in very quickly to what you're looking out in those areas. Especially I think when you're in a stable cycle and you roughly know what the users are looking out for, as you change certain things, right? Those particular segments, right? You have to zoom in and understand what they are looking out. Okay, data, right? Tons and tons of data you have in-house, right? But really the most reliable source of information is really from the users, right? For us, we monitor top users, right? We try to think, what these users are saying and doing, right? If in your game there are forums, we look out at what they're saying. If they have something outside of that, we try to guess. This user could be that person, that ID, and then we try to monitor these people. So there are certain groups of people that we monitor because what they say is very important for our own feedback and for the community at large. Okay, data analytics. This is also something very interesting. We tried this in-house. We tried to put dedicated teams in place to try to look at data, try to harmonize some of these things in terms of expertise. The reality is that if you're not on the ground and you're not the ones dealing with the customers, you're not the ones looking at data, understanding what the data means, some of this is just not going to work out as smoothly, right? So I think it is with a pinch of salt. You really have to balance these things, right? In terms of efficiency of tools and stuff, yes, but analysis, at the end of the day, is still the responsibility of the team. So in-house, what we do is that we make it a responsibility for the developers themselves to understand what the data means. Never mind if you're a programmer, a designer, right? It's your responsibility to understand these things. So your goals should really drive what data to look for. Okay, almost there, right? So 3 things I've talked about: content discipline, operational discipline, and data discipline. But I think really what's key to all this is fiscal discipline, right? All of us here, right? You may be a business owner, you're running a business, you could be working for a company, right? But the fundamental objective is really for your game to make money. Right, so let me just show you some examples here, right? Whenever we launch a new game and we actually set goals and targets, right? For the year, for the month, daily, right? And then events by events, right? And then we monitor this against to see what we've been doing and what we've been achieving, and really, are we getting there or are we not getting there? And then that allows us to make certain decisions, right? So I've shown here, right? We actually do this on a daily basis. We check the deviations, we check what is it, we check the stats. This event versus that, what's the delta? Right? And then from there, we try to analyze and we try to do better in the next event itself. Okay, so tools to consolidate all this information. I think sometimes it's information that's getting stuck somewhere, right? Your developer team doesn't understand costs, right? To them, they just push out the stuff. But it's important for them to understand costs, right? The cost not only associated with development of the game, but also how the game is being serviced, how the game is going out, customer support. All these are additional costs as well. So in their minds, they need to have a very clear idea what revenue they have to target, what revenue, after all these things netted off, will result in bringing profits to the team, right? And that's important too. Okay, so you need to make adjustments on this, right? And in our company, we have a pretty rigorous approach to some of these things, right? Teams that are doing better, we put in more resources. Teams that are, we see the ultimate outcome not being too good, right? We start to shrink the number of people in the team, right? Some of our projects even is down to a vending machine staff, right? 1 to 2 man teams, right? Really just stocking up new content every week, once every 2 weeks, making sure it runs, it still generates decent ARPU, generates decent revenue, highly profitable, but we are not going to be spending way more resources there, right? So you have to take a step back, right? That's very important, right? Especially if you have limited resources. Are your teams better off doing some other thing? Are your teams better off looking at another product, new product, or existing one and try to branch it out to achieve more profitability? So I kind of want to leave this message here, right? If you don't know what you're making, right, every day, every month, right, I think that's a serious problem, right? You don't know whether you can afford a lunch, right? And I think the very important tool is how much does your lunch cost, okay? For those of you who have come to Singapore for the first time and you have been here for 3 to 4 days, right, and you have not tried this, you have not been to Singapore. So that's chicken rice for you. So before you fly off, please do make an attempt to do this. And with that, I end my presentation. I hope this triggers thoughts in your mind, right? I think these are things we know, but really it's really taking a very disciplined approach to some of these things. So if you have questions or you have tried some of these things, you have comments, you've tried them and you want to share those with me, or you have questions, feel free. Those are my contacts.
Thanks so much, Raymond. Okay, now we open the floor for question. Do we have any questions from the audience? Raymond, so just one question from me. For very small teams that don't have a lot of established practices, how would you suggest just getting into the practice of operational discipline?
I think it's important that you do need to sit down and really set aside time, on those 4 areas. If you don't park aside the time, you'll never get to doing it.
Do you think like a small project team needs a dedicated producer looking over this, or sometimes is it just the owner who's sometimes also the game designer or the programmer?
Yeah. I think it's tough, especially if the owner is part developer too, and there's a little bit of an emotional attachment to that too. So the owner or the producer have to kind of put on this hat and say, look, I'm going to be looking at this from this perspective, and then from there act accordingly. What's logical there?
All right. Any more questions for Raymond? All right, I guess there's done. So thank you so much.
Thank
you
you
can
very
also
much.
approach Raymond here.